Stay with me because this is the turning point. This is the kind of moment we'll look back on and say, that's when the ground shifted. About 11 hours ago, while most of the country was asleep, a federal appeals court in Washington, D.C., handed down a decision that, and I'm not exaggerating, changes the framework for how presidential power works in the United States. If you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happens in the next 72 hours is the kind of thing law schools will be dissecting for decades. You don't want to catch this story in fragments after it's already moved on. Let me walk you through exactly what just happened. At 6:47 a.m. Eastern, the D.C. Circuit didn't simply turn down Trump's emergency stay request. It undercut the entire strategy his team has been leaning on. And the speed is what makes this so significant. His lawyers filed the emergency application at 11 p.m. last night, and in less than 8 hours, the court hit back with a ruling that left almost no daylight for a plan B. They didn't set oral arguments. They didn't ask for more briefing. None of the usual signs you see when a panel is genuinely torn. Instead, they just denied it per curiam, meaning it comes from the court as a unit. All 3 judges unanimous. No dissent, no hedging, no separate opinions. Just a clean collective no. And the wording they chose is the tell. The panel wrote that Trump's alleged efforts to stay in power after losing the 2020 election were, if proven, an unprecedented assault on the structure of our government. Courts do not throw around unprecedented lightly, especially in an opinion with stakes like this. That single word is doing heavy lifting. It's the court signaling, this isn't routine hardball, it's conduct. They view as outside the normal boundaries of American constitutional order. What they're signaling is brutal. This isn't a coin flip legal debate or some delicate gray area constitutional puzzle. This is about a former president allegedly trying to cling to power after losing an election. And executive immunity was never built to cover that kind of conduct. And the court didn't just say no. They laid out 4 key holdings that reshape the entire battlefield. Write this down because this is the core of it. 1. The court flatly rejected the idea of absolute presidential immunity. 2. It treated the conduct at issue as private actions, not protected official presidential acts. 3. It signaled the charges can proceed and are strong enough to survive the usual appellate choke points. 4. It laid out a framework that now echoes beyond this one case, a template that could be cited across every criminal case Trump is dealing with. Here's why this matters in a way cable news keeps missing. Think back to the biggest presidential scandals we've lived through, Watergate, Iran, Contra Clinton's impeachment. In each of those, the endgame avoided a straight-up criminal trial of a sitting or former president. Someone resigned before it got there. Someone got protected by a pardon, or the fallout stayed in the political lane instead of a courtroom conviction risk. This ruling is pointing in a different direction. Nixon never got indicted because Ford's pardon shut the door first. In Iran, Contra Reagan's circle absorbed the damage while the president avoided the dock. Clinton faced impeachment, but it never turned into a criminal prosecution. What's happening now is different. A former president is fighting criminal exposure in multiple jurisdictions at the same time, and the immunity shield he's been leaning on is cracking in public in real time. This is the kind of constitutional nightmare the founders knew was possible, but prayed we'd never have to run in real life. And now we're running it. Trump's team, of course, has a plan B, the Supreme Court. A conservative majority, 3 justices appointed by Trump and Chief Justice John Roberts, a guy who's often focused on protecting the court's legitimacy and keeping it from looking like just another political actor. You'd expect the Supreme Court to step in, slow it down, protect the presidency as an institution. But look at what's actually happening. Silence. Not just from the liberals, from the conservatives too. From Roberts, from Alito, from Thomas. Even from the justices Trump put on the bench. No signals, no lifeline. Just a ticking clock. Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Barrett, nothing. No emergency stay, no shadow docket maneuver, not even a hint that any justice thinks this requires immediate intervention. And Lindsey Graham said it plainly, if the Supreme Court doesn't step in, we could be staring at a 2024 nominee who's been criminally convicted. A Republican senator saying that about the Republican frontrunner out loud on the record. That alone tells you how serious this is. If you're getting value here, hit like so, the algorithm pushes this breakdown to people who want the real picture, not the sanitized one. Now, here's where the math gets brutal. Judge Tanya Chutkan, who's handling the federal election interference case in D.C., has reportedly put the Speedy Trial Act in play. Once the immunity issue is final, that law puts a 70-day clock on starting trial. The appeals timer effectively started this morning, and the D.C. Circuit is expected to issue its full opinion on February 12th, about 28 days from now. That's the countdown. After that, prosecutors can demand an immediate trial setting. Chutkan's original date was March 4th. If the Supreme Court stays out, that date stops being flexible, it becomes locked. And here's the reality. A unanimous 3-judge panel ruling like this is rarely reversed by the full D.C. Circuit en banc. And the Supreme Court has already passed on an immunity-based move in this case once, so the window is shrinking. The exits are disappearing, and Trump's lawyers know it. Inside that legal shop, they've seen the witness list: Mike Pence, his own VP, Mark Meadows, his own chief of staff, Pat Cipollone, his White House counsel, Cassidy Hutchinson, who was in the room for key moments. That's why the pressure is spiking right now. They've seen what prosecutors have: texts, emails, phone logs, and the January 6 footage the entire country already knows. They understand what's coming, and the response has been predictable. A flood of truth, social posts, all caps, screaming election interference, attacking Judge Chutkan, alleging bias, and throwing out warnings aimed straight at his base. Then came the post that set off alarms across law enforcement in D.C. If these witch hunts don't stop, our country will face problems the likes of which we've never seen. Read that again. A former president under prosecution for allegedly trying to overturn an election is effectively warning of unrest if the case keeps moving. This isn't just spicy politics. It can be read as pressure on the process, even witness intimidation or obstruction. And the key point is simple. Every post becomes potential evidence. It gets screenshotted, time-stamped, archived, and dropped into a file. He can't help himself, and every line he types makes prosecutors' job easier. Right now, Washington, D.C. looks like it's bracing for a major confrontation. Capitol Police are on heightened alert. Security barriers are going up around the federal courthouse. Counter-protest groups are mobilizing. Multiple agencies are coordinating in real time. This is day 1 of a 70-day countdown, and the threat posture is already being raised. Joint terrorism task forces are watching extremist chatter online. U.S. Marshals are planning tighter courtroom security for prosecutors, witnesses, and even the judge. They're not dismissing the rhetoric this time. January 6th proved what weeks of fraud claims and fight language can turn into a violent attack on the Capitol. The pattern is already on the record, and Washington isn't sleeping tonight. Now, let's get specific about the charges because this matters. This isn't executive privilege drama. This isn't normal politics. It's 4 federal criminal counts aimed at the core of how a constitutional democracy functions. Conspiracy to defraud the United States. Conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Conspiracy against rights. Obstruction of an official proceeding. These aren't technicalities. They go to election integrity and the peaceful transfer of power. That's what's on trial. And then there's the jury pool, Washington, D.C., where Biden won about 92% of the vote. Biden got 92.1% of the vote in D.C. in 2020. And that's the jury pool. Prosecutors aren't leaning on shaky witnesses or fuzzy theories. They're leaning on Trump's own circle, his vice president, his chief of staff, his White House counsel, people he chose and trusted, people who were there. And even if you think the D.C. case has weaknesses, even if you imagine a scenario where he slips out there, Georgia is still waiting. Down in Georgia, Fulton County D, Afani Willis is pushing a RICO case with 19 co-defendants, and that's 19 potential cooperators if anyone starts looking for an exit. The evidence there isn't a copy-paste of the federal case. It's separate, and it's state level. The recorded call asking to find 11,780 votes, the fake elector paperwork trail, with documents sent toward the National Archives and the Coffee County voting system breach. Different facts, different laws, different exposure. And none of it hinges on federal immunity arguments, because Georgia is a state prosecution. Federal immunity doesn't save you in a state case. So drop a comment. Do you think Trump gets convicted before Election Day, or does he run out the clock past November? Because Georgia isn't the only problem. Florida is still sitting there. The classified documents case, the Mar-a-Lago boxes, what the FBI recovered, and allegations that this wasn't some routine paperwork fight, but national defense material under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 793. Retaining that kind of information can mean up to 10 years per count, and Trump is facing dozens of counts. And if prosecutors can show surveillance footage was deleted after subpoenas went out, that's not just bad optics. That's the kind of detail that turns a documents case into an obstruction nightmare. If prosecutors can show Trump ordered any deletion after subpoenas, that's straight into obstruction territory, a major federal felony with massive exposure. This isn't a hypothetical anymore. It's procedural. It's moving, and the timeline is tightening. And politically, you can see the stress cracks. MAGA loyalists are digging in, while establishment pragmatists are quietly looking for exits. Internal threats are flying at anyone who breaks with Trump. Election officials who certified the 2020 results are still living with harassment and death threats. And here's the cold math GOP campaigns are doing behind closed doors. If conviction becomes real, a meaningful chunk of Republican voters say they could walk. Some polling has shown big slippage among Republicans if Trump is convicted enough to panic any operation that runs on razor-thin margins. That number is political poison in a general election. It's why swing state Republicans are already creating distance, Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, because a convicted felon at the top of the ticket doesn't just hurt Trump, it drags the whole slate down. And there's still the constitutional wildcard, the 14th Amendment. Section 3, the Insurrection Clause. If courts ever apply it, it doesn't care about party strategy. It bars anyone found to have engaged in insurrection from holding federal office. Section 3 doesn't require a criminal conviction, that's true, and that's why Colorado and Maine tried to bar Trump from their primary ballots. But that window slammed shut fast. The U.S. Supreme Court unanimously reversed Colorado in Trump versus Anderson and made clear that states can't enforce Section 3 against federal candidates like the presidency without a federal enforcement mechanism from Congress. So the removals didn't stand, and the whole fight got rerouted to the Supreme Court's framework. And while America is consumed by this, the rest of the world is watching. Allies are unsettled by the spectacle of a former U.S. president under criminal pressure hinting at domestic unrest. Adversaries see opportunity. They probe, they test, they look for cracks. Because when U.S. stability looks shaky, the ripple effects don't stop at our borders. China is ramping up pressure on Taiwan. Russia is still pressing its campaign in Ukraine, and the IAEA is warning that Iran's standoff over inspections and highly enriched uranium cannot drag on indefinitely. So when the U.S. looks unstable at home, it doesn't stay domestic. To allies and rivals alike, it reads as vulnerability. And here's the deeper truth. Most coverage misses beyond the court deadlines and legal filings. A constitutional reckoning is unfolding in real time. The D.C. Circuit's move blows up the old assumption that former presidents sit in a special zone beyond criminal accountability. That protective wall is cracking fast. For decades, the system leaned on norms: don't cross certain lines, respect oversight, don't weaponize power, and accept election results. When those norms hold, the law rarely has to do the heavy lifting. Those norms aren't enough anymore. Once courts reject broad immunity, the balance shifts, and it doesn't just hit Trump. It rewrites expectations for every future president, any party. And now prosecutors are moving on a criminal justice clock, not a political calendar. Once that clock starts, it doesn't stop for polling or campaigning. It doesn't wait for primaries. It doesn't bend to party pressure. And Trump's tone has changed in a way people should not ignore. He's not just yelling witch hunt anymore. He's calling out potential witnesses by name. Pence betrayed me. Barr is disloyal. Meadows is weak. That's not just messaging. In a case like this, it can read like pressure on witnesses, and it raises serious red flags fast. That's the federal witness tampering lane, 18 U.S.C. 1512. At least the lane prosecutors can argue it fits. But here's the irony. These posts don't scare institutions into backing off. They harden resolve. Every attack gets archived. Every escalation becomes potential evidence of intent. And instead of freezing the case, it can give prosecutors more to work with while the prosecution is already moving. And here's what witnesses understand. Once prosecutors are moving, cooperation becomes self-preservation. Silence can turn into legal exposure. And once even one mid-level player flips the shockwave, travels upward, because one co-conspirator cooperating multiplies pressure on everyone above them. Here's where we are right now, 28 days until the D.C. Circuit issues its full opinion, 45 days until the trial motion phase locks in, and 70 days until the speedy trial clock runs out. Jack Smith has formally said Trump's immunity claims are meritless. A 3-judge panel just backed that unanimously. And the Supreme Court still silent. Capitol Police are on heightened alert. Investigations are moving fast across 4 jurisdictions. Disqualification arguments are being fought at the same time. This is convergence. Everything from the last 3 years, January 6th, evidence Mar-a-Lago documents, grand jury testimony, immunity appeals, is slamming into one tight window where decisions get made and there's nowhere left to hide. When Judge Chutkan gavels in opening statements, the fog disappears. Jurors won't be voting on Trump's policies or personality. They'll be weighing documents and records built by federal prosecutors, backed by testimony from Trump's own insiders, and reinforced by video the whole world has already watched. No plausible deniability if your own vice president takes the stand. No, I barely knew him when your chief of staff describes Oval Office conversations. No perfect call spin when jurors hear the recording. The paper trail is there. The witness list is brutal. And the charges are narrow, specific, and built to stick. If a conviction lands anywhere before November sentencing, becomes the next clock. That means the Republican nominee could be a convicted felon. Secret Service protecting a candidate under court control. Rallies replaced by video. A campaign operation consumed by legal restrictions. That's a scenario with no modern American precedent. Trump is the most unpredictable variable here. His reactions are getting sharper, more openly authoritarian, and less tethered to legal reality. And warnings of chaos if prosecutions continue aren't just slogans, they're red flags. Law enforcement is treating them that way. Threat posture is rising elevated FBI assessments, JTTFs, monitoring extremist chatter, US. Marshals, tightening courtroom security and protective details, ramping up for prosecutors, witnesses, and judges. They're not brushing it off because history already taught them the cost of ignoring this kind of rhetoric. January 6th followed weeks of fraud claims and calls to fight. The next 28 days are the danger window. Trump sees the odds tightening and he feels control slipping. And when he feels cornered, he escalates. That pattern shows up again and again across his career and politics. And this doesn't end with the D.C. indictment. Jack Smith's work doesn't stop at one case. Evidence tied to witness tampering and obstruction is being funneled to prosecutors. Multiple grand juries are active across D.C., Miami, Atlanta, and New York. And the exposure isn't just federal state-level charges, can keep moving in parallel. Tax issues, bank fraud, campaign finance, insurance, fraud, each on its own track, each stacking risk independent of the others. We're in the scenario the Constitution allows for, but the founders hoped we'd never activate multiple accountability systems firing at once. Criminal prosecution, civil litigation, oversight pressure, and even talk of constitutional disqualification. Watch the Republican Party over the next 4 weeks. That's where the next break happens. These cracks aren't just temporary stress inside a coalition. They look like structural realignment. Once elected Republicans start publicly breaking from Trump, the dam doesn't reseal it, fractures wider. Each defection makes the next one easier, and sometimes the loudest signal isn't a statement at all. It's the silence. More bad rulings are coming. More witness details will leak. More former insiders will step forward, and more Republicans will quietly hope for a conviction, so they don't have to choose between loyalty and electability. Here's the real question. Now, this isn't about if Trump gets convicted anymore. With the evidence, the witnesses, and the venues, a conviction somewhere is starting to look more likely than not. So the real question becomes bigger. What version of American democracy is left after we've stress-tested every guardrail built to hold presidents accountable? Because Trump's entire brand has been rules don't apply to me, consequences bounce off, and media pressure can bend institutions. What's collapsing now isn't a narrative, it's the illusion that willpower can beat procedure. Court orders, deadlines, jury selection, witnesses under oath. The criminal system is cold and methodical, and it doesn't care about rage posting. Process is the one arena he's never been able to dominate. The countdown is real. The record is getting locked. And the next move isn't Trump's, it's the courts. Courts don't negotiate. The next 10 weeks won't just decide Trump's fate. They'll test whether accountability still means anything in American democracy. If you want the real mechanics, not the sanitized version, subscribe right now. We read the court filings. We decode the strategy. We track what prosecutors are actually building without the partisan noise. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications because the next 28 days will move faster than cable news can keep up. Drop your prediction below: convicted before the election, or does he delay past November? I'll see you in the next breakdown.